Welcome back to the Growth Hacking Culture podcast. Today, we are diving into a topic that's often seen as an oxymoron: how to be disruptive in the public service. For too long, the public sector has been characterized by a culture of risk aversion, often leading to slow adaptation, missed opportunities, and a struggle to meet the evolving needs of citizens. While accountability and stability are vital, and an over reliance on playing it safe can stifle the very innovation that is essential for effective governance in the 21st century. Consider this. Research suggests that public sector employees have historically been perceived as more risk averse than their private sector counterparts, with some studies indicating that risk aversion can even be a factor in selecting into government employment. This emphasis on security and adherence to established procedures, sometimes they are well intentioned, can lead to a pervasive bureaucracy that hinders agility and proactive problem solving. Our guest today is an expert who challenges this entrenched mindset, exploring how governmental and public sector organizations can move beyond the comfort of the status quo to embrace calculated risk, foster creativity, and ultimately deliver better outcomes for everyone. We are going to be exploring the hidden costs of risk aversion, examining successful examples of public sector innovation, and uncover actionable strategies for transforming government culture from within. I'm so happy to have you with me, Matthew Oleniuk. It has been, I have never covered this topic, and I know that
Okay.
this is something that bothers most of us. Like when we look at the government organizations, we consider them slow, we and it's not as progressive as we would like as citizens. Matthew, thank you very much for spending time with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Matthew, tell me one thing. How did you end up working in this specific area? And what made it attractive for you?
Well, that's an interesting question. What I'll preface kind of my story with is what might seem to be in contradiction to what you just said about aiming high, getting through risk aversion. Just to clarify, I am a risk expert. Uh, this is not coming from a place of we need to exercise caution at all costs. Um, I counsel my clients on how to embrace both risk and ambition. So I'm excited to get into that with you. How did I get here? Well, I had a little bit of a circuitous path on the way to becoming a risk expert. The first half of my career was quite international. I worked in a number of different functions within Ireland, UK, Australia, New Zealand, even a spell in South Korea. And that was a mix of both public sector and private sector. However, they were mostly driven around project management, project delivery, and client services. So I was always on the delivery side. It wasn't until I moved back to Canada and I actually settled in Ottawa. I'm not that's the capital, and I'm not originally from there, but I happened to land there. And of course, government is the biggest game in town in the capital, as it is in most national capitals. And so I found myself in public service at the within Canada, and I was tasked with building a learning development program as well as learning events and learning communications for the audit community within the Canadian federal government. So that was my real first introduction to that whole spell. I had always been focused on delivering it, getting it out the door, pushing through obstacles, but not necessarily taking a beat to assess what they might be in anticipation. After doing that for a little bit, I actually ended up kind of jumping over to the other side of the tracks and getting into audit. And I spent the next 15 years in risk oversight and audit within the public sector, rising through the ranks, eventually becoming a chief audit executive there. Um, what I found was because I come from such a different background to many auditors, there was always a language gap between the project delivery folks and the audit and the risk folks. And if you were to ask the audit and risk folks, what's the most important thing that any project can do? The natural answer was cover the risks, make sure that we're focused on the risk and we, try to manage the risk and write them all down and have a whole function dedicated to that. If you're asked the project side, I mean, you'd have the official answer, of course, but the real answer, the one that you could observe, would be, okay, I'm going to fill out this form, get the compliance stuff done out of my life so I can actually focus on the work that matters. And what I obviously discovered is that there's kind of merit, I guess, to both intentions. But really, there is a common ground there that wasn't identified. And that is, if we're not talking about the objectives of the outcome, then we're not talking about risk in any productive fashion,
Mm.
right? So if we're treating it as a separate channel, then what we're really doing is creating a little subset that isn't going to serve anyone other than the reporting mechanisms and the compliance metrics and all that type of stuff. Meanwhile, if the project folks aren't talking about risk, then how do you even know where you're going to go with any sense of confidence? So really all a risk is what am I trying to accomplish and what can get in the way? What is going to prevent me from reaching the finish line? And once we start to phrase it in that type of fashion, then we start to marry the two mindsets and we start to be a little bit more productive. And what I always try to encourage is let's keep that ambition that slowly kind of withers. And I'll talk about address one of the things that you raised in a second. Let's preserve that ambition. Let's just figure out what the roadmap is so that we can keep plowing ahead and we'll be better prepared while we try to attack that. Um, what just one thing I just was curious about, or sparked a little life in me there when you mentioned about you know uh, projects aren't that ambitious. The people within government aren't ambitious, and in my experience, the people themselves are very ambitious. And we're probably going to unpack this, but the collective culture is risk averse.
Mm.
But when we're talking with the individuals, especially those early days, you're whiteboarding and you're thinking about what could be, you definitely see lots of pie in the sky moonshots. But then we start to apply the practical reality, and I'll put reality in air quotes there, but the practical reality of how to actually deliver it. And that's when we start to think, well, we probably won't be allowed to do this, and they're probably going to say to no to that, and so on and so forth. And then very quickly we end up settling those ambitions down towards the bottom, and we deliver, business as usual.
Exact. I love the way you frame it because I see, I have never worked in the public sector. I have worked in corporations, and it is the same root cause of the problem, this misunderstanding of what is the role of an auditor or what is the role of risk
Hmm.
in any project. And
Hmm.
because we don't understand, we are fearful and we say it like the enemy. I still remember my interactions with auditors, whereas never like something I had to be afraid. I was
Right.
because I thought that the mission is to find the thing that I'm doing wrong and that
Right.
I didn't consider that I didn't know. And
Right.
I think it's all over the in the corporate world as well as in the public sector. It's almost the same. But if we can crack this misknowledge that the fact that we don't know enough about the other, I think many things could be done the right way. Many problems could be avoided.
Yeah, I mean, my approach when auditing was always that my goal and the audited team's goal were the same. I was an internal audit, I was an external, so I was part of the same organization. So my approach was always both of us want this organization to succeed. We're just coming at it from different angles.
Mm,
They're delivering, and we're just trying to identify, is there a better way to do it? That's it. That's the way that I always approached it.
mm.
So that would, of course, take a little bit of time to build that trust to dissuade the concerns and hopefully people weren't too afraid when I came because at the end of the day I was there to try to make things better as opposed to pointing out mistakes and again maybe that came from having had so much experience being on the delivery side and not just being too theoretical and analytical but having that practical element as well.
Oh, yeah, that helps a lot when you have been in the right side of using your hands to make things happen,
Yes,
the
yes,
perception is different, by the way, because then
absolutely.
you understand better what could be a real risk versus a theoretical risk with low chance of happening.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
by the way, so I wanted to know your opinion. According to you, what could be the historical or systemic root of this culture in the government? Is it legacy of bureaucracy, risk aversion, or something else? Let's consider also the human psychology. Um,
Mhm.
maybe in the government, people are used to stay in the same position for a longer time versus corporations. So you want to protect your place, what you have earned, either knowledge, either power, and maybe in the government is a little bit stronger than in the corporate world where we tend to move uh, functions quite quickly. What would you consider to be the real root cause of the perception of the culture in government?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously no kind of one core issue. Otherwise, it would be, easily addressed and easily fixed. But I would say that there are some broad strokes that can be seen across governments. I'd say, right from the municipal right up to the federal. Um, I will say, however, that I almost see it as the opposite of too much stability. From an individual perspective, should I say, because there's tons of movement within, especially the senior ranks. And I'd say that almost presents part of the problem of risk aversion, is because a lot of these huge projects are multi-year, right? Especially if you're talking about these really big infrastructure projects or community building projects, that might take 10 years, might take 15, might take 20 years. But even if, well, let's just say 5 years, there is a solid chance that whoever is there actually won't be there because there is a lot of shuffling. Now, this could have been different. The world was much different when it was kind of nothing but baby boomers in the jobs, because there were probably more qualified people than positions available. And so when talking with especially those who recently retired or retired a little while ago, they might have talked about being in those jobs for 10 years or more. Nowadays, that's just not the case. And there's a lot more fluidity, and a lot of more people are spending 2 years in a very, very senior role, or even less. I mean, sometimes we see 1 year, and they're at a senior role, they're heading a huge sector, and then they switch departments, because we are talking about massive organizations as well, right?
Mm.
So Canadian federal government is about 300,000 people. The U.S. federal government is about 2 million people. These are huge organizations, which means that you can bounce around quite a bit, and try to, let's be honest, a lot of people try to promotion hop as well, right? So, so what that does is that creates a little mini focused window in which they are going to be evaluated on the project. There's a solid chance that they won't even be there, if or when the project is a big success, but they will be there if anything goes wrong along the way.
Mm.
Right. So if it's a 5, 6 year project, and they think that they might be there for 2 years, let's just try to make sure that nothing bad happens within those 2 years. Now, this obviously is not a calculated strategy. These aren't bad people trying to get away with something. It's just the natural inclination of recognizing what might happen to the career. So I think that's, to be quite honest, a big contributing factor. And that's why you see in some private sector companies, if they're hiring a CEO, they offer share price or share options that only vest after X number of years, right? Because we've seen that even within the private sector, where people hop back and forth trying to shop their services. And then a lot of these companies that do say, we're paying big money for the CEO, we don't want him to start something and then walk away before it's finished, so therefore his compensation is going to be delayed until he's actually finished the job, which is reasonable, and at least it's upfront, and everybody knows it.
Mm.
So I'd say that's a big contributing factor. Second one is just the nature of a lot of these projects is that they're so big, they require expertise from lots of different areas. Now, if we're within one kind of department or agency, even there would be lots of different stakeholders. You might have a policy group, you might have the project group, you might have, IMIT, you might have some other back office people, and you might have another player. So right off the bat, you've got lots of stakeholders involved. Chances are, if it's big enough, there'll be another department or agency. So those 3 or 4 or 5 teams within your department are going to be replicated in another department. And then on top of that, you've got the central purse. They're going to be doling out the money, so they're going to want to have some say in it as well. Now, within each of those functions, you're probably going to have, you know, project team, a project steering committee, maybe an oversight committee, and then an intra-departmental oversight committee, and then, of course, the government-wide oversight committee. So there's just so much infrastructure in place and so many people that are not only asking questions, challenging what are you going to do, but also just procedurally going to slow things down a little bit, right?
Mm.
And that's why agile is so tough to deliver very often in a lot of these environments, because the project team wants to push and just do lots of little micro wins. But there's just so many people involved and so many committees and so many oversight functions that it's, well, I'm not going to come and, meet you every single week. So let's schedule it once a quarter and we'll see. And don't start the next thing until we've seen it, and so on and so forth. So that whole infrastructure issue really, really slows things down as well.
Mm. Matthew, in your career, if I'm not wrong, you have been working in almost every single continent in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Not
cross.
Antarctica yet.
Yeah, Antarctica. Yes, I was thinking also about Antarctica. That one soon, it will come soon. And I guess that you have seen a little bit like first hand what happens when you have a culture of playing it safe. Do
Mhm.
you have any like concrete examples where playing it safe, the this type of culture has produced negative effects?
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, it happens all the time because I mean, you mentioned a great word or a great turn of phrase there a little while ago, talking about the unknown. It scares us, right?
Mm,
And that plays such a huge role in unproductive risk conversations. So we're not sure what it is, therefore we're going to say that it's high risk, and we're going to focus on the things that we've seen, and those are by very nature lower risk because we've seen them. There's a massive false equivalency there because what we know on the surface might not be actually what's going to unfold in reality. So what I've seen many, many times, and I saw this just a couple of years ago as well, this really materialized over and over and over and over again when it comes to software, right? So most governments now are really pushing towards just buying software. Let's not develop it. Let's just buy it and tweak what we need to. It took a really long road to get there. And there are still organizations that are trying to build in-house software. And the reason that this happens is internally they'll have these discussions and they'll say, well, this type of software has got limited functionality. We're not going to be able to do this one process.
mm,
This other software is very expensive. This other software, they're always pushing upgrades, and so it's going to be a trap, and so on and so forth. They come up with lots of different excuses, but most of them are very, very broad stroke. And what they fail to acknowledge is, yes, there is an IMIT team in-house, but I mean, government is not in the business of building applications. So as a result, most of their staff is about maintenance and upgrading and hardware and that kind of thing. So we still have to hire the consultants anyways. And they're very expensive and they got multiple clients. And so their time is kind of fractured. And on top of that, we're trying to build up from scratch, figure out needs from scratch, something that might have been done a million times around the world in a different software. And the irony of all of this is that most of the times we're trying to build software, we're using our process as a justification for not buying something off the shelf. When in reality, our process is very fluid anyways. It's not even well defined. I don't know how many times I've gone into a function and been handed, flowcharts saying, this is what we do. And I just say, okay, thanks. And then I just ask dumb questions, so what do you do if this happens? What do you do if this happens? You ask 5 different people, get 5 completely different answers. So the processes aren't even baked in. And yet we're saying we're unique and we can't possibly adapt to something uniform. So that is a classic play it safe example where we just say, I know what we can do in-house. I know what our processes are. We can do it, and it's going to be better. And most of the time, overwhelming majority of the time, it turns out to be a huge failure. A recent example in Canada, I mean, it's still making headlines, and this is now 10 years later when they tried to uh, rebuild or build a brand new payroll platform. And yes, it was Oracle based, but they really bought such a stripped down version because they thought we have so many unique features that we need to customize it to an extreme degree. So they bought it, they spent years customizing it, and they flicked the switch, and it just plain didn't work. People were getting, not being paid enough. Some people were getting paid too much, and some people actually weren't even paid at all. And there's a massive crisis. And a $300 million project 10 years later has cost about $4 billion. And they have to replace it. There's absolutely no fixing it. It's so broken that we just need to, close our eyes and pretend this never happened. So playing the safe option invariably is really just blinding ourselves to the real risk picture and convincing ourselves that what we know is going to be the easiest.
You made me think, I was laughing because you made me think about this problem that there was with the Berlin airport.
Okay.
Uh, It was supposed to be changed several times. They have spent billions of dollars to change the Tegel airport in bloody Berlin. And it has never been done. It has been changing. They have been trying to construct different type of airports. And at the end, nothing has happened for close to 20 years. And a
Yeah.
lot of money from the community has been spent in bullshit. Oh my God.
I think I did read about that. I mean, it was started 20 to 25 years ago, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's
I
still
did read about
nothing.
that.
Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's a tough pill to swallow. And a lot of this stuff is, there can be a couple of massive contributing factors into big projects that don't succeed. And the first is that because public funding gets so much scrutiny, sometimes, no, I shouldn't say sometimes, I'd say very frequently, we don't ask for the money we need, we ask for the money that will be approved, right? And so we need $150 million, but there's no way they're going to say yes. So we'll ask for 100, and then we'll just see what happens. And of course, that money is spent, it is insufficient. And so then we have to go back, and then there's the sunk cost fallacy. So the leaders are invariably going to say, well, we can't just stop it now. We've already spent so much money. And so, yes, we're going to green light this, but you really need to be careful this time and so on and so forth. So that's a huge factor up front before any project work is really started. Very often it's underfunded before we've spent a penny. And then the second thing would be with these really longer projects, if problems really start to arise, well, what happens? Well, the politician that authorized it, he or she is voted out of office, replaced by somebody else. They're going to bring a fresh perspective, quote unquote, to it. And then the senior leaders in the project, they'll be, rotating in and out and everything else. And so it just becomes this amorphous, it becomes a routine, right? And it's funny, like I don't know why this just comes up to me right now, but Apocalypse Now, that old Vietnam War movie, right?
I know
And,
it.
and it was such a long film shoot. Some of these movies are filmed in, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever. And this went on for something like a year and a half or 2 years, just nonstop problems or whatever. And apparently, the director's daughter was in school at the time, and everybody's first day of school. What does your daddy do? What does your dad? My daddy makes Apocalypse Now, right? He's not a filmmaker. It's just that is his life for such a long time. He makes Apocalypse Now, and that's almost the way that I see it. A lot of these projects, it's just I'm not, building a new airport. I'm taking care of the procurement for the airport, and that's my job, right? Because it's
Oh,
dragging on for so long.
I wanted to ask you something that is quite relevant today because I was thinking about what has happened in the US with the implementation of Dodge to have more
Hmm.
efficiency in the government.
Yeah.
And I wanted to pick your brain to know what would be your take about the role of leadership in perpetuating or disrupting this culture in the government? Do you need to have like a specific type of leadership when you're working with governmental organizations? And is it possible really that what could be the characteristic of this type of leadership in order to drive really innovation? And you can bitch about Dodge, by the way, as much as you want. You're
Thank you.
Canadian, you're not American. You can.
There you go. There you go. Good. I've got a clean slate here. So one of the things that I think can make any organization great is really founded in the principles of democracy, right? So I'd say that the most effective public leaders are ones that factor in all of the, either positive or dissenting opinions and tries to find something that's productive and on principle delivers something to the citizenry, right? So if we're catering to this side or catering to that side, eventually it's just going to be undone. And I do think that kind of diversity of thought is extremely important with any team. And that's the way that I would always build my teams as well. Well, I've got lots of people who are great at analysis. I don't have as many people who are great communicators, right? So you always want to build complementary skills. So when we see kind of an extreme perspective or viewpoint brought into maybe an environment that needs a little bit of shakeup, I welcome the new perspective for sure. And I think that if we have too much of X, then a little bit of Y could go a long way, for sure.
Mm.
That's as a matter of perspective, I'd say. When we take one extreme, when we abandon one extreme and jump, feet first into another extreme, without pausing to see, if the water's deep, if the water's cold, if anything else, I think that we're going to encounter unforeseen problems, right? So just like that risk assessment of the water that we're jumping into, has anybody actually dived down to see if there are any rocks there? So I like the intention behind having an advisory committee to figure out what are some quick wins. But we can see from the evidence. I mean, it didn't take long to surface a lot of the issues that the data that they were using was old or just plain wrong. They were double counting issues. They were misidentifying programs and funding. They were highlighting instances of waste or fraud that had actually already been identified internally. So the rush and the push and the urgency is great. But we've got to have these coming together points where we marry that a little bit with the complexity of the situation too. Because again, I mean, I wouldn't ever say that trying to assemble cars from different countries at millions of units a year, or building a rocket that could go up and come back down, that is like anything but basic or simple. But it is focused and narrow within a certain faculty, right? Within a certain area of expertise. And public sector has got every area of expertise. Now, whether or not, again, they're efficient, that's obviously up for debate and welcome for a refresh. But there's just so much going on that I could come in and come up with all the world's solutions within a few hours. But how many of them are actually going to stick? So that's where my concern is there.
Is there any specific characteristic for either a person hired internally in the public sector or even an external person that you bring and say, I want somebody who knows about risk because we suck at that? Is there some characteristic that are very specific to work in the public sector when you compare it versus the corporate sector? What characteristic this person who is taking care of the risk when you manage huge projects should have?
Yeah, I'd say that a lot of the characteristics are going to be similar between private sector and public sector, and I have worked in both, and I've worked in very small private sector, I've worked in very large private sector, and I'd say that private sector, if it's large enough and it has little enough competition, can take on the characteristics of public sector as well, for sure. So I'd say that, I mean, at the end of the day, most of the time we're all kind of hiring from the same basic population, right? It's not like there is one, one productive country and one unproductive country, and governments are going to hire from this country, and private sector is going to hire from another. It's all the same population, so it's all the same folks going through the same different school systems, everything else. Having said that, of course, some people are naturally drawn to public sector, some people are naturally drawn to private sector. What we need, I'd say, is something that most public sectors say they really want, and that is innovation. I'd say people who are trying to drive urgency. What I think, it's just a reality that public sector will fall under more scrutiny. It will follow a more rigorous process. And so we just need to accept that some things, and I'm saying some things, not everything, some things will require a little bit more patience.
Mm,
And some folks will just not be able to tolerate that, and that's fine. Like I'd rather they find something that can suit them. The Silicon Valley startup, Facebook very famously had a sign up in the early days, move fast and break things.
mm.
So that was their company motto. It would be nice to have that same sense of urgency in public sector, but while also recognizing if you break something, um, people might not be able to eat. A plane might crash.
Mm.
Trains might derail. These are real consequences, and that's a big part of the risk averse culture too. Is that some of that risk aversion is really well founded. It depends on what area we're looking at. We don't want to start relaxing, water quality.
Mm.
Everyone should have the choice to be poisoned or not is not really a sound mission statement for any health agency, right? We want to make sure that there is a minimum bar of nothing going wrong. So part of that is going to be baked in. And I wouldn't want anybody to rush through and just say, well, nobody's had bad water in 20 years, so we should relax the regulations. Well, guess what's going to happen if we do that? So there is room for that. There's room for both, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is we want that urgency tempered by an expectation that our 6-month performance assessment might actually compromise somebody's safety, depending on where we work.
Does it bring any benefits? Because I have seen a little bit of some governments trying to get advisors from countries who have a reputation in a specific sector, like
Hmm.
health
Hmm.
or like how you roll some public roads in the street. I have seen a lot of Singaporeans going around, a lot of Swiss
Hmm.
people going around.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
does it bring any benefit to bring them? Can we extrapolate what a Singaporean has done to another country?
Well, it really always depends on how we do it. So Singapore is a great example, and I have heard Singapore used as a reference point so many times,
Yeah.
because I mean, it's hyper efficient. Its services are generally considered world class. It's very digital. It's very economically delivered as well. So there are lots of great reasons why we'd want to use that as a model. Question is you know can a city state be emblematic of countries that take up half a continent and have hundreds of millions of citizens, right? It's difficult to gel those in any type of granular fashion. So taking the principles, fantastic, excellent. What did they do? How did they do it? Why did they do it like that? Let's see how we can bring that across. Again, fully support that. But before making bold promises, I think we just have to understand the environment. About what was that? About 12, 13 years ago, I think it was, the Canadian federal government as well undertook, which a lot of governments undertake periodically, which is a massive, at least an attempted massive reduction in the public service. So they wanted to reduce the footprint, just deliver things more efficiently, and kind of get more bang for the buck from all the employees. Very noble task from the position of most citizens, right? They want to spend as little money on government for maximum effect. So everybody pretty much agreed with it. Of course, obviously, public service wasn't a big fan of it, but most citizens were. Um, and so what did they do? They brought in a massive team of consultants to help drive this. Because of this type of we need an outside perspective and we need outside expertise. And this massive team of consultants had experience in doing this type of thing. And so let's draw from all of their efforts. Um, but what did they have to do? Well, they basically had to get to know the entire public service. At that time, I don't know exactly what the expenditure was, at least that, $250 billion per year, 300,000 people. They had to kind of get to know that within a few months. On its core, understanding mission statements, that easy. That's super easy. But when you're trying to get into those processes and figure out which areas are too heavy and which areas could be freed up, um, they would occupy entire boardrooms with flowcharts as wallpaper across, all four walls and still on the tables and everything else. And that would just be for one area of one department. And so what ended up happening is spent goodness knows how many millions of dollars and months and months and months. I think it went well over a year. And in the end, they were applying kind of blanket 5 or 10% budget reductions everywhere and
Mm.
just saying to the departments, well, I don't care what you do, just figure it out 5 to 10% off the board, depending on the things. Now, I'm sure a lot of folks would say that it's a lot more nuanced than that. Um, but I would hardly say that it wasn't, that it just became too difficult for outsiders to understand how much is there in such a short period of time. Because what happens is the public facing claim is always very bold, and I'm going to be different from everyone before me. I'm going to deliver this super quickly in, months, not years, or weeks, not months. And I'm going to do what hasn't been done before because I'm the person to get it done. They want to do that. They want to get elected the next time. Um, but it's almost always more complex than that. And then unfortunately we get into that conversation, well, it's too complex and so it needs to be long and it needs to be slow. And again, I'm not a favor of that either. We need bold goals while also balancing the fact that we can't just simply program an algorithm and have it all figured out for us.
Mm. Is there a good way to disrupt a culture in the public sector? So if so, a government or an
Mhm.
organization in the government wanted to disrupt that culture, what could be the right way to start?
Excellent question. And it's one that I face every single time I talk to somebody from the public service, every time I take on a new client. And my response is sometimes, you know, depressing and empowering in equal measures. um, so what I will say is the culture of the public service, and that means any public service, is just it's not going to change. Not eventually it will, maybe, these things always operate on curves. But again, going back to those numbers, if you're talking 300,000 people, if you're talking 2 million people,
Hmm.
even when a prime minister or a president, they want to drastically change things. That does change some stuff, and then somebody else comes in and they want to change everything back, and so it bounces. And what very often happens is a lot of people just kind of settle and just say, I'm just going to wait this out, right? Because I know it's going to change again anyways. So that culture can be, can have a ripple, but you're never going to have a massive wave of change. But the empowering part is when we're talking about senior leaders, say a project leader or someone responsible for a portfolio, they can change the culture within their kind of mini sub team there. So they can change their team's culture, whether or not that's somebody who's supervising, 200 people or even just 10 people. They can try to establish that culture within.
Hmm.
And they're the ones who can set those goals and try to empower their teammates. And if you hear any talk of, well, we probably won't be able to do that, start probing, why don't you think we'd be able to do that? If someone were to challenge that, what is a response we could give to them? And that's where the risk aversion can really become productive risk discussions. Because if a team is trying to create that, especially if we're talking about a project team, especially in the early stages or in a turnaround, because I deal with a lot of public sector project turnarounds, the problems, the things that need fixing. Even if we're midstream and something that needs to be turned around, we often default to these are problems and we just need to get out of this. If we're going to think more ambitiously, think about all of those challenges that are going to come because they will come. People will come up with 1,000 different reasons why you will not be able to do that. It's not practical. It's not reasonable. Lots of people tried it. It always fails. Come up with something quote unquote safer. If we start to encourage within our own team that culture of challenging ourselves and trying to play devil's advocate for ourselves and start asking what could go wrong? What will they ask about? What are the challenges that they are going to position to us to shut us down? Then we can start to think, well, that might be a really valid issue.
Mm.
What would we do if that actually happened? What would be our plan? So that when we get into these challenge environments, whether that's an oversight committee or a funding committee or whatever it is, they might raise this challenge and you might say, yeah, I agree. That definitely could happen. And this is exactly what we do about it. And this is why we feel that it's a controllable or manageable risk. Always come with the answers. And then it becomes a matter of conversing with the oversight, conversing with the challenge functions rather than responding to them. And once we start to get into those, then it's not about, well, these risks are too big. What, let's go with the smaller risks. It's about how do we plot our way forward in a realistic fashion. And that's what I'd always prefer to push. Keep the ambition, just make sure that we're doing it with eyes wide open.
Hmm. Is there like any governmental initiative that have been successful at challenging the plate safe mindset and that you admire? It-
The play it safe, I've always got kind of big stars in my eyes. So I'll be honest, I'm not, I might be biased against the play it safe, just full stop. Um, sometimes we just have to do that for sure, but generally those are reserved for the much smaller projects. I did see an innovation project a few years ago in which there was a lot of public funding being channeled in through various means, and some of them were more transparent than others, and some of them had more rigor than others. And a team was challenged with pulling all of that together, building up a new function that could still distribute this public funding to worthy candidates in a way that was both, predictable, transparent, rigorous, but also met the merits of a broad set of requirements. So it could become kind of an everything fund without being, a slush fund, which is what a lot of unfortunate programs fall into. Um, and it really did kind of seem like an impossible task. But this team really boiled it down to principles. Oh, and of course, since it was a flagship program, they basically had to do it yesterday, right? So they didn't have this 11-year horizon where they could contemplate and postulate and consult with everyone on the planet. They had to get it done. And they took that bunker mentality. They consulted with their risk folks and the audit folks to make sure that again it didn't turn into something that became what it shouldn't. But they applied a goal mindset. And I think that that's so important now. That one of the advantages that program had was that it did have that political support as well as senior leadership support, and that can become a significant hurdle for a lot of projects. And so that it was kind of a perfect storm of positive circumstances for them. However, that occurs a lot too, and the projects still fail. Whereas this one, they set up a repeatable function. They set up something that channeled, I mean, a lot of money too. This wasn't building slides and playgrounds in communities. This was massive infrastructure.
Mm.
And they did in a very short period of time.
Listen, Matthew, this conversation has been insightful because I realize how little I know about the public sector. I realize that there is a lot of similarities and challenges that are similar in the corporate world as well
Hmm.
as in the public sector.
Hmm.
There might be most of the time it's a question of perception. We were talking about the perception about risk managers or auditors in front of the business people or the
Yeah, yeah.
frontliners. And maybe that's another thing is that we misunderstand that the challenges of the public sector might be very often similar to than the corporate, even the politics. You can call it politics in another meaning in the public
Yeah,
sector.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You still have politics. And
yeah.
thank you for spending the time for to discuss about that. It was very insightful. Now, how the hell do we get to ask more questions? Because this audience sometimes is hungry for to getting to know more. Let me know how can we reach you out? Is there a good way to keep tabs together?
Absolutely. So probably the easiest way is through my website on theriskinsider.com/health check. So that health check is a public sector project health check list in which we've got 10 of the biggest risks that are invariably ignored. So one of the challenges that public sector has is we're always trying to push these big corporate enterprise risk mechanisms on one-time projects, and it doesn't fit. So we have a risk list that again becomes a compliance measure and doesn't feed the project. And then we ignore the really big ones that are going to be lurking in the shadows, whether we want to, address them or not. And so what I try to do is always push people towards these major hidden projects that will determine whether or not the project is a success. And I would argue that even one or two of these risks could completely sink an otherwise successful project. So that's free to download. It can be found again at theriskinsider.com/health check. And it's also got all my contact details. So we can 100% continue this chat with all of your thirsty or hungry information listeners.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It was lovely to speak to you. I'm going to put the link below this episode. Have an excellent day.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. Great questions, great conversation.